My 16-year-old niece, Chris, voluntarily checked into a $3,000 day behavioral center after her best friend died but started begging not to go back. So I hid a notebook and she documented how they were drugging all the girls into unconsciousness, while male staff watched strip searches and Dr. Lord was touching them during medical exams. But when I went to police, they warned me. His wife ran the state mental health board and his sister ran CPS, until we united 43 families to expose how they were billing insurance for fake therapy while testing experimental drugs on teenage girls and keeping some past 18. When my 16-year-old niece, Chris, started begging not to go back to the behavioral center, I knew something was terribly wrong. She had voluntarily asked to be admitted 3 weeks ago after her best friend died in a car accident. Chris had been struggling with panic attacks and couldn't sleep. Her parents found the center, the best-rated adolescent psychiatric facility in the state. It costs $3,000 per day, but insurance covered it. They'll help you process your grief, her mom had said. Chris packed her bag willingly, but now she was sobbing and clinging to her mother during visiting hours. "Please don't make me go back, please," she whispered. Her parents exchanged worried looks. The therapist had warned them she might resist treatment at first. I pulled Chris aside while her parents talked to the staff. "What's happening in there?" I asked gently. She looked at the floor and stayed silent. "You can tell me anything," I said. She shook her head quickly. That's when I noticed something strange. Chris used to wear tank tops and shorts all the time. Now she was in long sleeves and pants despite the summer heat. When she reached for her water bottle, her sleeve pulled up. I saw bruises on her wrist. "Chris, who did this?" I asked. She yanked her sleeve down. "Nobody. I have to go back now." She walked away before I could ask more questions. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about those bruises. I called Chris's mom, my sister. "Something's wrong at that place," I said. She sighed heavily. "The director said Chris is manipulating us. It's part of her illness apparently. She needs to complete the program." I wanted to scream. This wasn't manipulation. This was fear. Real fear. I decided to do some research on the center. Their website showed smiling teens doing art therapy and yoga. The reviews were perfect. 5 stars across the board. But when I dug deeper into state records, I found something odd. They had never been inspected. Not once in 5 years of operation. The next week I visited Chris again. This time I came prepared. I slipped her a tiny notebook and pen. "Write down everything that happens," I whispered. "Hide this." She looked terrified but took it. When she came back out for the next visit, she secretly handed me the notebook. I read it in my car and felt sick. They were forcing all the girls to strip naked for safety searches twice a day. Male staff watched. If anyone refused, they got injected with something that made them sleep for days. Girls who complained were put in solitary confinement. They called it the quiet room, but it was a concrete cell with no windows. Chris had written about the medications too. Every girl got the same pills regardless of their diagnosis. The pills made them feel like zombies. They couldn't think clearly or stay awake. One girl named Jessica tried to refuse her pills. They held her down and injected her instead. She hadn't spoken since. Chris drew a map showing cameras everywhere except the treatment rooms, where the worst things happened. She wrote about Dr. Lord touching girls during medical exams that weren't medical at all. She wrote about girls screaming in the quiet room for hours while staff ignored them. I took the notebook to the police that same day. The officer looked uncomfortable when I mentioned the behavior center. "These are serious accusations," he said slowly, "but teen psychiatric patients often make false claims. It's part of their illness." I showed him Chris's bruises in the photos I'd taken. "She probably did that to herself," he said. That's when I learned the truth. Dr. Lord's wife was the director of the state mental health board. She approved all psychiatric facilities. Her sister was the head of the Child Protective Services. Her brother-in-law was the district attorney who would prosecute any cases. I felt trapped, but I couldn't give up. I started connecting with other families. I found June's aunt, whose niece had aged out at 18, and immediately filed a report that went nowhere. I found Ben's grandmother, who pulled him out early and got sued by the behavioral center for the remaining treatment costs. They all had stories, they all had proof, but nobody would listen. I created a private Facebook group and we started sharing evidence. Photos of bruises, recordings of threats, medical records showing dangerous substance combinations. We had 12 families with documented abuse. I tried talking to journalists, but they wouldn't touch the story. The behavior center spent millions on advertising with every major outlet. I contacted the insurance companies thinking they'd care about fraud, but the center had people there too. They were billing for therapy while drugging kids unconscious. They were charging for individual counseling that never happened. One mother discovered they'd billed her insurance for 24 hours of therapy in a single day, but every complaint got buried. Every investigation got dropped. That's when something unexpected happened. Chris managed to smuggle out a recording. What was on it changed everything. The recording was hidden inside a teddy bear Chris had kept from childhood. She'd torn open the seam and tucked the tiny device inside before sewing it back up. When I played it in my car, my hands shook. Dr. Lord's voice came through clearly. He was talking to another staff member about a girl who'd reported abuse to her parents. "We need to increase her dosage," he said. "Make sure she can't form coherent thoughts for the next few visits. Tell the parents she's having a psychotic episode." The other voice asked about cameras. Dr. Lord laughed. "The treatment rooms don't have any for a reason. What happens there stays there." Then came the part that made me pull over. They discussed Jessica specifically, how she'd fought back during an exam, how they'd sedated her so heavily she might have permanent damage, how they'd altered her medical records to show she'd been violent and required restraint. I made copies immediately. One on my phone, one on a USB drive, one uploaded to a secure cloud server. This was evidence of conspiracy, medical fraud, and abuse. Surely someone would have to listen now. I drove straight to the police station. A different officer took my report this time. He seemed genuinely concerned until I mentioned the behavioral center. His whole demeanor changed. "You need to be careful," he said quietly. "These are serious accusations against respected medical professionals." I played him the recording. He took notes, but his face stayed neutral. When it finished, he stood up. "I'll file this report. Someone will be in touch." But I knew that look. I'd seen it before. Nothing would happen. That night, my phone rang at 2 a.m. No caller ID. When I answered, there was just breathing. Then a man's voice, not one I recognized. "Stop digging or your niece will never come home." I called my sister immediately. She was groggy and confused. "What are you talking about? Who called you?" I explained about the recording and the threat. She got quiet, then angry, but not at them, at me. "You're making things worse," she said. "The director called us today. She said you've been harassing staff and making false accusations. She said Chris is getting worse because of your interference." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Did you not hear what I just said? They threatened her. Maybe you misunderstood. Maybe it was a wrong number. You're so paranoid about this place." The next morning, I found my car tires slashed. All 4 of them. No cameras in my apartment complex parking lot, of course. The mechanic said it looked deliberate. Clean cuts. I called the other parents parents in our Facebook group. 2 of them had gotten similar calls. One had their home broken into while they were at work. Nothing stolen, but everything moved slightly. A message. We decided to meet in person. 12 families gathered in a church basement. Everyone brought their evidence. Photos, recordings, medical records. The pattern was clear. Every child who resisted got drugged into compliance. Every parent who complained got threatened or sued. Ben's grandmother spoke up. They sued me for $180,000 in remaining treatment costs when I pulled him out. My lawyer said I'd lose. The contract we signed was ironclad. I had to take out a second mortgage. June's aunt nodded. They threatened to have me arrested for custodial interference. Said I was endangering June by removing her from necessary treatment. A father I hadn't met before showed us his daughter's journal. She'd hidden it in her pillowcase. The entries described being locked in the quiet room for asking to call home, being forced to take pills that made her feel like she was drowning, being told her parents had abandoned her. We strategized for hours. The police wouldn't help. The media wouldn't listen. The state agencies were compromised. We needed another way. That's when Benny's mom suggested something. She worked at the insurance company that covered most of our kids' treatment. Not in a position of power, but she had access to billing records. I could pull the data, she said quietly. Show the fraud. Insurance fraud is federal, different jurisdiction. It was risky. She could lose her job, maybe face charges herself, but she'd seen what they did to her son. The bruises, the dead look in his eyes. She was willing to risk it. We agreed to be careful. No more phone calls or emails about this. In-person meetings only. Different locations each time. We were parents fighting a system designed to silence us. I visited Chris again that week. She looked worse, thinner. Her hands shook constantly. When I hugged her, she barely responded. The bear is gone, she whispered. They found it. My heart sank, but she grabbed my hand under the table, pressed something into it, a tiny piece of paper. I didn't look until I was in my car. It was an address, nothing else. I drove there that evening. It was a rundown apartment complex on the other side of town. I'm really curious about this timing. Chris asks to go in for help with grief, then 3 weeks later she's desperate to leave. That's quite a shift for someone who went willingly. Apartment 3B. I knocked, not knowing what to expect. A young woman answered, early 20s, thin, nervous. She looked at me for a long moment before speaking. You're Chris's aunt, she said. It wasn't a question. I nodded. I'm Jessica's sister, the Jessica in your niece's notes. She let me in. The apartment was sparse but clean. She made tea while I sat on a worn couch. Jessica can't talk anymore, she said. Whatever they gave her caused permanent damage. She's living with me now, but she needs constant care. She showed me photos. Jessica before, bright-eyed, smiling. Jessica after, vacant stare, hands that wouldn't stop moving. I've been documenting everything, she continued. Medical records, videos of her condition, the bills that keep coming even though she's been out for months. She had boxes of evidence, more than any of us had collected. She'd been building a case for a year. Why haven't you done anything with this? I asked. Her laugh was bitter. You think I haven't tried? I went to everyone. They either didn't believe me or were too scared to help. Dr. Lord's connections run deep. She pulled out a folder. Inside were photos that made me gasp. Girls with bruises and patterns, injection sites infected from overuse. One girl's arm was so swollen it looked deformed. These are from a nurse who quit, she said. She took them before leaving. She's too scared to come forward, but she gave them to me. We talked for hours. She knew things we didn't, which staff members were the worst, which substances they used off-label, how they kept 2 sets of books, one for inspectors who never came, one real. As I left, she grabbed my arm. Be careful. They've been watching me. They'll be watching you too. Driving home, I kept checking my mirrors. Every car behind me seemed suspicious. When I got to my apartment, my door was slightly open. I called 911 from my car. The police found my apartment ransacked. My computer was gone. My files scattered, but they'd missed the USB drive hidden in my tampon box. The officer taking the report seemed sympathetic until I mentioned why I thought this happened. Then came the familiar look, the subtle step back, the careful neutral tone. We'll investigate, he said. But without evidence of who did this, I knew how that sentence ended. Nothing would happen. Again. My sister called while the police were still there. The director wants to meet with us tomorrow. All of us. She says there have been misunderstandings she wants to clear up. I wanted to scream at her. Our kids were being tortured and she wanted to have a meeting, but I agreed. Maybe facing them directly would reveal something. That night I stayed at a hotel. I couldn't sleep. Every noise made me jump. I kept thinking about Chris in that place. About Jessica who couldn't speak anymore. About all the girls whose families didn't know or didn't believe. The recording was our only real evidence, but I'd played it for the police and nothing happened. We needed another way, a bigger platform, someone who couldn't be bought or threatened. I thought about Benny's mom at the insurance company, about the federal fraud angle. It was our best shot, but we'd need more than billing records. We'd need to show the human cost. The next morning, I met with 5 other parents before the meeting with the director. We agreed to record everything. Different devices, different angles. If she said anything incriminating, we'd have it. The behavioral center looked like a resort from the outside. Manicured lawns, cheerful paint, playground equipment that I'd never seen any child use. The reception area had soft music and nature photos, all designed to reassure parents they were leaving their children somewhere safe. Dr. Lord was in the meeting. He smiled at me like we were old friends. My skin crawled. The director, a polished woman in her 50s, spoke in soothing tones about miscommunications and the challenges of treating troubled teens. She showed us charts about success rates and testimonials from grateful families. When I brought up the bruises, she had an answer. Self-harm was common in their population. When I mentioned the recording, she looked confused. What recording? I must be mistaken. Dr. Lord spoke about the importance of completing treatment, how interrupting the process could cause permanent psychological damage, how some parents, in their desperation, saw abuse where there was only necessary medical intervention. My sister nodded along. The other parents looked uncertain. The presentation was slick, professional, almost believable if you didn't know what I knew. Then the director said something that changed everything. She mentioned that they were expanding, opening 2 new facilities in neighboring states. They'd received major funding from a private investor group. She said it proudly, like it was good news. More children they could help, she said. More families they could serve. I thought about Jessica, about the quiet room, about girls being drugged into silence, and now they were going to do it to more kids. After the meeting, Dr. Lord approached me in the parking lot. My sister had already driven away, convinced I was overreacting. Your niece is a sweet girl, he said. It would be a shame if her treatment had to become more intensive. I recorded every word on my phone. The threat was clear even if the words were careful. She's made such progress, he continued. With just a few more months, she could have a full recovery. But stress from outside interference could cause a serious setback. I wanted to hit him. Instead, I smiled. I just want what's best for her. He patted my shoulder. His hand was cold even through my shirt. I'm glad we understand each other. As he walked away, I saw him typing on his phone. Within minutes, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Just 2 words. Smart choice. But I hadn't made any choice. Not yet. That afternoon, I met with Jessica's sister again. She'd found something new. A former employee willing to talk. A therapist who'd quit after 2 weeks because she couldn't stand what she saw. The therapist, Victoria, met us at a coffee shop 2 towns over. She was nervous, constantly watching the door. She'd signed an NDA when she quit, but she said some things were more important than legal threats. She told us about her first day, how she'd been assigned to do intake evaluations, how every single girl, regardless of their actual issues, got the same diagnosis codes, the ones that guaranteed maximum insurance coverage. She told us about the medication room, dozens of girls lined up twice a day, same pills for everyone, no individual assessment, no monitoring for side effects, just compliance or consequences. She'd tried to report it internally. The director had smiled and said she must be misunderstanding their innovative treatment approach. The next day, Victoria found her car vandalized in the staff lot. The message was clear. I have photos, she said quietly, of the medication logs. They show the real doses, not what's in the official records. She slid a flash drive across the table. I'm leaving town tomorrow. I can't be part of this anymore, but those girls need someone to fight for them. As we left the coffee shop, I noticed a car following us. Black sedan, tinted windows. It stayed 3 cars back but took every turn we did. Jessica's sister noticed too. This is what they do, she said. They want us to know they're watching. We drove to a busy mall and lost them in the parking garage, but the message was received. They knew we were still fighting. That night, the Facebook group exploded. 3 families had been contacted by lawyers. The behavioral center was threatening to sue for defamation. The letters were identical, just names changed. Submit to cease and desist or face legal action. Some families were scared. They had other kids to think about, jobs to protect. They couldn't afford a legal battle with an organization that had unlimited resources. But others were angry. The threats just proved we were right. Why sue if there was nothing to hide? We decided to be smarter. No more Facebook, no more digital trails. We'd meet in person, share information physically, like resistance fighters in occupied territory, because that's what this felt like, a war, and our children were prisoners. The next visiting day, I could barely recognize Chris. She'd lost more weight. Her eyes were unfocused. When she tried to speak, her words slurred. What are they giving you? I asked. She shook her head slowly. Different now, stronger. Can't think right. I held her hands. They were ice cold. We're going to get you out, I promise. She tried to smile. They said you stopped, said you gave up. Never, I told her. Never. A staff member appeared. Visiting time is over. As they led Chris away, she looked back, mouthed something I couldn't understand. The staff member's hand on her arm looked more like a grip than a guide. I sat in my car afterward, shaking with rage. They were destroying her, destroying all of them, and everyone who could stop it was either bought, threatened, or indifferent. But we had evidence now. The recording, the photos, the medication logs, the insurance fraud data Benny's mom was gathering. We just needed someone with power who would listen. That's when I remembered something. The investor group the director mentioned. Private funding for expansion. That meant someone was profiting from this beyond just the insurance fraud. I started researching corporate records, investment filings, property deeds, following the money trail that led from the behavioral center to shell companies to an investment firm based 3 states away. The deeper I dug, the clearer it became. This wasn't just about one facility. It was a business model. Buy distressed properties, convert them to behavioral centers, bill insurance at maximum rates while providing minimum care. Wow, the sister has been collecting evidence for a whole year? How did she stay so organized through all that pain? The way she sorted everything into boxes shows incredible strength. The profit margins were staggering. And Dr. Lord wasn't just a doctor. He was a partner, part owner. Every drugged child, every insurance claim, every desperate family put money in his pocket. I printed everything, filled binders with evidence, financial records showing millions in profit, photos of abused children, testimonies from families, the recording that started it all. We were building a case, not for local police or state agencies, for someone bigger, someone who couldn't be bought by a small town network of corruption. But first, we had to keep our kids alive, because the retaliation was escalating. Benny's mom found a tracking device on her car. June's aunt's employer got anonymous calls claiming she was unstable. My own job was suddenly restructuring, and my position might be eliminated. They were trying to break us, make us too scared or too desperate to continue, but they'd miscalculated. They'd hurt our children, and parents protecting their children don't break easily. The war was just beginning. I spent the following morning organizing our evidence into categories. Financial fraud in one binder, medical abuse in another, testimonies in a third. The recording stayed on multiple devices, backed up in places they'd never think to look. Benny's mom called around noon. She'd pulled the insurance data overnight, working from home to avoid suspicion. The numbers were staggering. The behavioral center had billed her company alone for over $12 million in the past year, most of it for services that couldn't have physically happened. She came to my apartment with printouts hidden in grocery bags. We spread them across my kitchen table, cross-referencing with the testimonies we'd collected. The pattern was undeniable. They billed for individual therapy during times when girls were sedated. They charged for group sessions that never occurred. They even billed for overnight monitoring by specialists who didn't exist. While we worked, my phone buzzed with a text from my sister. The behavioral center had called her, expressing concern about my mental state. They suggested she might want to consider getting me help. The manipulation was transparent but effective. My sister was already doubting me. Now they were planting seeds that I was the unstable one. I showed Benny's mom the text. She pulled out her own phone, revealing similar messages sent to her husband. The behavioral center was systematically working to discredit anyone who challenged them. We needed to act faster. Every day our kids spent in that place was another day of damage, but we also needed to be smart. One wrong move and they'd bury us in legal threats or worse. That afternoon, I drove to meet Victoria again. She'd agreed to one more meeting before leaving town. This time she chose a park on the outskirts of the city, away from cameras and crowds. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes. She handed me a thick envelope without speaking at first. Inside were photocopies of internal memos, medication orders, and staff schedules. The smoking Jan was a directive from Dr. Lord himself, instructing staff to increase sedation for any patient whose family was problematic. Victoria explained how the system worked. Girls who complained or whose families asked questions got moved to the intensive treatment wing. Higher doses of medication, less outside contact, more time in the quiet room. The goal was to break them down until they stopped fighting. She also revealed something that made my stomach turn. They were testing new substance combinations on the girls. Experimental doses not approved for adolescents. Dr. Lord was publishing research papers based on these unauthorized trials, building his reputation while using our children as lab rats. As we talked, I noticed a maintenance van parked across the street. It had been there when we arrived. Victoria noticed it too. We walked to our cars casually, but I could see her hands shaking. The van pulled out after we did, staying several cars back. I took a circuitous route home, doubling back several times. The van disappeared, but the feeling of being watched remained. They were getting bolder. That evening, Jessica's sister called. Her apartment had been broken into while she was at work. Nothing stolen, but Jessica's medical records were scattered everywhere. A warning. She was packing to stay with friends, taking Jessica somewhere safe. The pressure was mounting on all of us, but it was also making us more determined. We scheduled another in-person meeting for the next night, this time at a community center 3 towns over. 15 families showed up, more than ever before. Word was spreading despite the behavioral center's attempts to silence us. Parents who'd been too scared to speak up were finding courage in numbers. We shared what we'd learned, the insurance fraud, the experimental substances, the systematic abuse disguised as treatment. One mother broke down crying as she realized what they'd been doing to her daughter for 6 months. A father who worked in IT suggested we create an encrypted communication system. No more phones or social media. We'd use secure channels that couldn't be traced or hacked. It felt extreme, but we'd already seen what they were capable of. We divided tasks. Some would gather more evidence. Others would research the investment firm funding the expansion. A few volunteered to reach out to families at the other facilities owned by the same company. If this was a business model, there were more victims out there. As the meeting ended, Benny's mom pulled me aside. She'd found something else in the insurance data. Several claims for girls who'd aged out of the system showed continued billing after their 18th birthdays. The behavioral center was keeping some patients longer than legally allowed, hidden in their system. The implications were terrifying. How many girls had disappeared into that place? How many families had been told their daughters needed just a little more treatment while the bills kept coming? I went to visit Chris again 2 days later. The change was dramatic. She could barely keep her eyes open. Her speech was so slurred I could hardly understand her. When I held her hand, she didn't squeeze back. A nurse I hadn't seen before watched us closely. When she stepped away to answer a phone, I quickly checked Chris's arms. Fresh injection sites, multiple ones. They were drugging her even more heavily than before. I wanted to grab her and run, to carry her out of that place and never look back, but I knew they'd stop me, call the police, have me arrested for interference with medical treatment, and then I'd never see her again. Instead, I whispered that I loved her, that I was still fighting, that she needed to hold on just a little longer. I couldn't tell if she understood. The nurse returned and announced visiting time was over. As she led Chris away, I saw her stumble. The nurse roughly pulled her upright, irritated rather than concerned. In the parking lot, I found a note under my windshield wiper. Final warning. Stop now or she pays the price. No signature needed. The threat was clear, but they'd miscalculated again. The note was evidence. I photographed it, saved it, added it to our growing collection. Every threat they made was another piece of proof that they had something to hide. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those billing records, about girls who'd aged out but never left, about Jessica who couldn't speak, about Chris who was disappearing before my eyes. I got up and started mapping connections. The investment firm, the shell companies, the properties they owned. The pattern that emerged was chilling. They were creating a pipeline. Troubled teens went in, insurance money flowed out, and some kids never emerged at all. My research was interrupted by a call from June's aunt. June had been transferred to the intensive wing. The official reason was behavioral regression. The real reason was that her aunt had been asking too many questions. We were running out of time. Every family that pushed back saw their child punished. The behavioral center was using our kids as hostages, betting we'd back down rather than risk their safety. But backing down meant abandoning them to that place, and more kids would follow. The expansion plans were moving forward. 2 new facilities would mean hundreds more victims. I met with a lawyer the next day. Not a local one, but someone from the state capitol who specialized in healthcare fraud. She listened to my story, reviewed some of our evidence, and then delivered crushing news. The legal process would take years. Investigations, hearings, appeals. Even with solid evidence, the behavioral center's connections would drag it out, and during that time, our kids would remain in their custody. She suggested a different approach. Media pressure, public exposure, make it too costly for them to continue operating. But that came with risks too. Defamation suits, retaliation, and the chance that public scrutiny would make them more careful, not stop them. I left her office feeling defeated. Every avenue seemed blocked, every solution too slow. Meanwhile, Chris and the others were suffering. That's when Benny's mom called with unexpected news. She'd been quietly talking to coworkers at the insurance company. Several had noticed the unusual billing patterns from the behavioral center. They'd been afraid to speak up individually, but together they were willing to file an internal complaint. It wasn't a complete solution, but it was pressure from a new direction. If the insurance company launched its own investigation, the behavioral center would have to respond. They couldn't threaten or sue an entire corporation. We decided to coordinate our efforts. While the insurance investigation proceeded, we'd continue gathering evidence. More families were coming forward every day. Some had pulled their kids out early despite the legal threats. Dr. Lord being a part owner changes everything. No wonder they're protecting this operation so fiercely. The tracking devices and job threats seem like desperate moves from people who know their scheme is unraveling. Others had stories dating back years. One mother showed us videos of her daughter before and after treatment. The transformation was heartbreaking. A vibrant, artistic teenager had become a hollow shell. The girl couldn't remember her time at the behavioral center clearly, but she had nightmares every night. The evidence was overwhelming, but we needed more than proof. We needed someone with power to act on it. The local authorities were compromised. The state agencies were controlled by Dr. Lord's family. Even the media seemed afraid to touch the story. That's when I remembered something Victoria had mentioned. Dr. Lord's research papers. He was building his reputation on studies conducted at the behavioral center, publishing in medical journals, presenting at conferences. I started pulling his published work. The studies all involved adolescent psychiatric patients. The methodologies were vague about consent procedures. The substance combinations he tested weren't approved for teenage subjects. If we couldn't get him through the legal system, maybe we could challenge his medical credentials. Research misconduct was taken seriously in academic circles. It would take time, but it was another angle of attack. I shared this idea with the group. A father who worked at a university offered to help. He knew people on medical ethics boards. If we could prove Dr. Lord was conducting unauthorized experiments, it might be enough to shut him down, but we needed more direct evidence. The medication logs Victoria had given us were a start, but we needed to show clear connections between Dr. Lord's published research and the girls being drugged at the center. Jessica's sister had an idea. She'd kept all of Jessica's medical records from her time at the behavioral center. center. If we could match the substances and dosages to Dr. Lord's studies, we'd have proof he was using patients as unwilling test subjects. We spent hours comparing documents. The matches were perfect. Every substance combination Dr. Lord published about had been tested on girls at the behavioral center. The dates lined up, the dosages were identical. He wasn't just abusing them, he was profiting from their suffering in multiple ways. This discovery energized our group. We had something concrete, something that could destroy Dr. Lord's credibility in the medical community, but we had to be careful how we used it. I visited Chris again, hoping to see improvement. Instead, I found her worse than ever. She didn't recognize me at first. When she finally focused, she grabbed my hand with surprising strength. She managed to whisper one word, "Please." I knew what she was asking. She wanted out. She wanted the nightmare to end, and I was failing her. A staff member interrupted, saying Chris needed to return for treatment. I watched them lead her away, my heart breaking. How much more could she take? How much more could any of them take? In the parking lot, Dr. Lord was waiting by my car. My blood ran cold. He smiled that same cold smile from the meeting. He spoke casually about how tragic it was when patients had adverse reactions to necessary medications. How sometimes, despite best efforts, permanent damage occurred. How families often struggled to accept that their loved ones would never fully recover. The threat was clear. Back off, or Chris would be next. Another Jessica. Another girl whose mind would be chemically destroyed until she couldn't tell anyone what had happened to her. I recorded the entire conversation on my phone. His arrogance was his weakness. He thought he was untouchable, that his connections protected him. But every threat, every admission, was more evidence against him. After he left, I sat in my car shaking. Not from fear, but from rage. He'd just admitted they could destroy my niece's mind whenever they chose, and he'd smiled while doing it. I called an emergency meeting that night, shared the recording. The group listened in horrified silence. This wasn't just about insurance fraud or medical malpractice anymore. This was about a man who enjoyed having the power to destroy children's minds. We had to act fast. Dr. Lord's threat against Chris meant we were out of time, but rushing could mean making mistakes, and mistakes could cost our kids everything. Benny's mom had news from the insurance company. The internal investigation was moving forward. They'd frozen payments to the behavioral center pending review. It was a small victory, but it meant financial pressure was building. The behavioral center responded by sending bills directly to families, threatening collections, liens on homes, destroyed credit. They were trying to force us to pressure the insurance company to resume payments. But something unexpected happened. The threats backfired. Families who'd been silent started speaking up. Parents who'd believed the center's lies began questioning. The billing threats revealed the truth that this was about money, not treatment. Our group grew to over 30 families. We had evidence of fraud, abuse, unauthorized medical experiments, and now direct threats. We had recordings, documents, testimonies, and physical evidence. What we didn't have was our kids' safety. Every day they remained in that place was another day of trauma, another day of substances that could cause permanent damage, another day closer to losing them forever. I spent my nights researching, my days gathering evidence, and my evenings coordinating with other families. My job was hanging by a thread, my savings depleted by gas money and copying costs. But none of that mattered compared to getting Chris out. The investigation into Dr. Lord's research was gaining traction. Medical ethics boards were asking questions. Academic journals were reviewing his submissions. It would take time, but his reputation was starting to crack. The insurance investigation was also progressing. They'd found enough irregularities to expand the review. Other insurance companies were being notified. The financial foundation of the behavioral center was weakening, but Dr. Lord wasn't going down without a fight. Families reported increased harassment, private investigators following them, employers receiving anonymous complaints, credit reports showing mysterious debts. He was trying to destroy us financially and professionally, make us too desperate to continue fighting. But he'd underestimated parental determination. Every attack made us more resolved. We started protecting each other. Families with stable jobs helped those who'd lost work. People with extra rooms housed those afraid to stay home. We created our own support network, stronger than his attempts to break us. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A nurse at the behavioral center reached out through Victoria. She'd been documenting abuse for months, afraid to speak up, but seeing families fight back gave her courage. She had photos, videos, audio recordings, proof of everything we'd suspected and worse. Girls being forcibly medicated, staff laughing about patients' distress, Dr. Lord ordering increased doses for families who complained. She was willing to testify, but she needed protection. Her job, her nursing license, her safety were all at risk. We promised to support her, to document everything, to make sure her sacrifice wouldn't be wasted. With her evidence, we finally had an insider's view. We could prove the systematic nature of the abuse, show it wasn't isolated incidents but policy, demonstrate that Dr. Lord personally ordered the mistreatment. But we still needed to get our kids out. The legal process was moving, but too slowly. The investigations were progressing, but our children were suffering now. We needed a more immediate solution. That's when the nurse revealed something crucial. The behavioral center's accreditation was up for renewal. The inspection was supposed to be a formality, but if we could ensure real scrutiny, it might shut them down. We had 2 weeks to prepare, 2 weeks to compile everything into a format that inspectors couldn't ignore, 2 weeks to save our kids. The work was exhausting. We organized evidence, prepared testimonies, created timelines showing patterns of abuse. Every family contributed what they could. We were building an airtight case, but Dr. Lord was preparing too. The nurse reported increased security at the facility, staff meetings about handling inspections, plans to hide the most damaged patients during the visit. We couldn't let him control the narrative. We needed the inspectors to see the truth, to talk to the girls who'd been drugged into silence, to visit the quiet room, to review the real medication logs. The nurse agreed to help from inside. She'd make sure inspectors saw what they needed to see, but it was dangerous. If she was caught, she'd lose everything, and the girls would lose their only ally inside. As the inspection date approached, tensions escalated. More families reported harassment. My own apartment was broken into again, though nothing was taken. The message was clear. We're watching, we can get to you. But we were past the point of intimidation. Our kids were depending on us. Other children's futures were at stake. The expansion had to be stopped. I visited Kreese one last time before the inspection. She was barely conscious, but she recognized me. I told her to hold on, that help was coming, that this nightmare was almost over. She squeezed my hand weakly. I saw trust in her eyes despite everything they'd done to her. She still believed I'd save her. I couldn't let her down. The night before the inspection, we held a final meeting. Everyone knew their role. Some would be at the facility, demanding to see their children during the inspection. Others would be ready with evidence if needed. The nurse would guide inspectors to the truth. It It wasn't a perfect plan. So much could go wrong, but it was our best shot at immediate action. Our chance to expose the truth when it mattered most. We didn't sleep that night. Too much depended on the next day. Too many children's lives hung in the balance. The war we'd been fighting was about to reach its crucial battle. As dawn broke, I looked at the boxes of evidence surrounding me. Medical records, financial documents, recordings, testimonies, proof of systematic abuse disguised as treatment. Evidence that Dr. Lord had built an empire on destroying young minds. Today, that empire would begin to fall. One way or another, our children were coming home. The morning of the inspection arrived with thick fog blanketing the behavioral center. I parked across the street at 6 a.m., watching staff arrive earlier than usual. They moved with purpose, carrying boxes and cleaning supplies. Dr. Lord's silver Mercedes pulled in at 6:30, followed by 2 other cars I didn't recognize. By 7 a.m., 12 families had gathered at a diner nearby. We reviewed our plan one final time. The state inspectors were scheduled to arrive at 9 a.m. Our inside nurse would text when they entered the building. That was our cue to arrive, demanding to see our children. Benny's mom distributed copies of key evidence to everyone. Insurance fraud documentation went to 3 parents. Medical abuse records to another 4. The recording stayed with me and 2 others. If they tried to confiscate one set, we'd have backups. At 8:45, we saw the inspection team's van arrive. 3 people in business attire carrying clipboards and tablets. They looked routine, bored even. They had no idea what they were walking into. Our nurse's text came at 9:03. We waited 10 more minutes, then drove to the facility in separate cars. The receptionist's smile faltered when she saw us filing in. I approached the desk calmly, asking to see Chris for an emergency family matter. Other parents made similar requests. The receptionist fumbled with excuses about visiting hours and protocols. That's when we heard it. A scream from somewhere deep in the building. Not pain, but rage. A girl's voice yelling about being locked up, about wanting to go home. The inspectors, visible through the glass doors of the conference room, looked up sharply. The receptionist frantically typed something on her computer. Within seconds, Dr. Lord appeared. His usual composure cracked slightly when he saw all of us. He tried to usher us outside, talking about disrupting treatment and visiting policies. But June's aunt had already approached the inspectors, explaining she hadn't seen her niece in 2 weeks despite daily requests. The lead inspector, a stern woman with gray hair, listened intently. She asked Dr. Lord why family visits were being restricted. His explanation about therapeutic necessity sounded hollow even to him. More screaming echoed through the halls. Different voices now. The inspectors exchanged glances and announced they needed to tour the facility immediately, not after the scheduled presentation. Dr. Lord's jaw tightened, but he couldn't refuse. As they headed toward the patient wings, I saw our nurse in the hallway. She made eye contact briefly, then gestured subtly toward the intensive care unit. The parents spread out, some following the inspectors, others waiting strategically near exits. I stayed with the main group as they entered the medication room. The nurse had done her job well. Instead of the sanitized version usually presented, inspectors saw the reality. Dozens of med bottles with the same medications. Dosage charts showing identical prescriptions regardless of diagnosis. A girl stumbling past, so heavily sedated she could barely walk. The lead inspector started asking sharp questions. Why was everyone on the same medication? Where were the individual treatment plans? Dr. Lord's answers grew increasingly defensive. They moved to the quiet room next, the concrete cell with no windows, just as Chris had described. The inspector checked a log. Girls had been kept there for days at a time. The violations were mounting. When they reached the intensive unit, I saw Chris through a small window. She lay motionless on a bed, IV in her arm. The inspector demanded to know what was being administered. Dr. Lord claimed it was standard hydration, but the nurse quietly handed over the real chart. Sedatives, antipsychotics at dangerous doses, experimental combinations. The inspector's face darkened. She ordered immediate access to all medical records. Dr. Lord tried to stall, mentioning privacy laws and protocols, but she was already on her phone, calling for additional investigators. That's when everything accelerated. The behavioral center's lawyer arrived, trying to limit access, but more families had gathered outside, and local news had been tipped off by someone. Not national media, just a small local station, but enough to put pressure on. The inspectors split up. One reviewed financial records with Benny's mom translating the insurance fraud. Another examined the medication logs Victoria had documented. The third interviewed girls who were coherent enough to speak. By noon, the facility was in chaos. Staff members were being questioned. Some broke down and admitted they'd been ordered to over-medicate difficult patients. Others revealed the 2 sets of books, the hidden patient files, the girls who'd aged out but were still being held. Dr. Lord retreated to his office, making frantic phone calls, but his network was crumbling. The insurance companies had launched their own investigations. The medical board was asking about his research practices. His carefully constructed empire was collapsing. The turning point came when inspectors found Jessica's file, the real one, not the sanitized version. It documented how she'd been drugged into permanent disability for reporting abuse. The lead inspector immediately ordered the facility into emergency receivership. Parents were allowed in to see their children. I ran to Chris's room. She was awake but confused, the heavy sedation finally wearing off. I held her while she cried, promising she was leaving today. The process was chaotic but swift. Emergency medical teams were called to evaluate each patient. Those who needed immediate care were transferred to the local hospital. Others were released to their families with strict instructions for follow-up care. Dr. Lord tried to leave during the confusion, but investigators stopped him at the door. They had questions about insurance fraud, medical malpractice, and falsifying records. His medical license was suspended pending investigation. By evening, the behavioral center was empty of patients. 43 girls were free. Some went home with their families. Others needed extended hospital care to manage withdrawal from the cocktail of substances they'd been given. Chris came home with us that night. She was weak, confused, and scared, but she was safe. My sister cried when she saw the medical records, finally understanding what I'd been trying to tell her. The next days were difficult. Chris suffered withdrawal symptoms as the substances left her system. Nightmares, shaking, moments of panic when she thought she was back in that place. But slowly, she began to heal. Other families faced similar challenges. Jessica remained nonverbal, needing round-the-clock care. Some girls had developed dependencies that would take months to overcome. The trauma went deep. The behavioral center never reopened. The investigation revealed extensive fraud, abuse, and medical violations. Dr. Lord lost his medical license and faced criminal charges for insurance fraud and practicing without proper consent. His network of protection crumbled when the evidence became undeniable. The other facilities owned by the same investment group were also investigated. Similar patterns of abuse were found. The entire chain shut down within 6 months. months. Dr. Lord avoided prison through a plea deal, paying massive fines and accepting lifetime bans from medical practice and working with minors. It wasn't the justice we wanted, but it meant he could never hurt another child in a medical setting. The insurance companies recovered millions in fraudulent billing. Some families received settlements for medical costs and ongoing care. It didn't undo the damage, but it helped with the expensive process of real treatment and therapy. Our group of parents stayed connected. We supported each other through the hard months that followed. Some children recovered fully, others bore permanent scars, physical and mental, but they were alive and free. Chris returned to school after 3 months of real therapy. She still struggled with anxiety and trust issues. The experience had changed her, but she was determined to move forward, to not let Dr. Lord's cruelty define her life. The nurse who helped us risked everything. She lost her job, but found work at a hospital that valued her integrity. Several staff members who'd participated in the abuse faced their own consequences, though many escaped accountability. A year later, I drove past the abandoned behavioral center. Windows boarded, parking lot empty, a for sale sign hung on the fence. The place that had terrorized so many children was just an empty building now. Chris was in the car with me. She looked at it silently for a moment, then asked if we could get ice cream. She didn't need to stare at the past. She had a future to build. The investigation reports were made public. They revealed a system that prioritized profit over children's lives. Changes were made to inspection protocols and family access rights. Small victories that might prevent another Dr. Lord. Some families pursued civil suits. Others just wanted to forget. We each found our own way to process what had happened. The trauma bond between us remained, even as we tried to return to normal lives. Victoria, the therapist who'd risked her career to help us, went on to advocate for better oversight of adolescent facilities. She couldn't undo what happened, but she could work to protect future children. The investment firm behind the behavioral centers dissolved quietly. The profits they'd made from destroying young lives disappeared into legal fees and settlements. The business model of institutionalized abuse had finally become too costly. Chris graduated high school 2 years later. She still took medication, but properly prescribed and monitored. She still had bad days, flashbacks to that place, but she also had good days, more and more of them. At her graduation, she hugged me and whispered thanks for not giving up, for fighting when everyone said to stop, for believing her when the world insisted she was lying. Dr. Lord disappeared from public view. His family connections couldn't save him once the evidence was undeniable. His research was retracted from medical journals. His legacy became a cautionary tale about power and exploitation. The families we'd fought alongside became extended family. We celebrated victories and supported each other through setbacks. Our children had survived something terrible together. That bond wouldn't break. Today, Chris is in college studying social work. She wants to help kids who've been through trauma, but she knows firsthand how systems meant to help can become weapons. She's determined to be different. The behavioral center building was eventually demolished. A small park stands there now. Sometimes I drive by and remember that morning when we thought we'd lost everything, when Dr. Lord seemed untouchable, when our children were prisoners, but we fought back, not with connections or power or money, just parents who refused to abandon their children, who kept pushing when everyone said to stop, who found strength in each other when the system failed us. It wasn't a perfect victory. Some scars don't heal, some damage can't be undone, but our children came home. They got the chance to rebuild their lives, and Dr. Lord's empire of abuse crumbled to dust. That's enough. It has to be. Subscribe for more content just like this. Look through my page for more binge-worthy stories.